Tonight, the Prime Minister on the referendum reversal.
So you think you should get an increase on minimum wage? Well, find out what the business community has to say. We'll tell you all about it in the Bahamas tonight.
And women's basketball gets ready for competition. The Bahamas Tonight, the national report, starts now.
Now in HD. ZNS Network presents The Bahamas Tonight. This portion of the news brought to you by BTC Everyday.
The country's leader addressing what prompted him to disregard the results of the 2013 gaming referendum. Good evening and welcome to the Bahamas Tonight. I'm Andre Rollins.
And I'm Altaviz Munnings. Cleopatra Murphy tells us in our top story tonight that Mr. Christie spoke in the House of Assembly about the referendum revision.
Prime Minister, the Right Honorable Perry Christie, is defending his decision to go against the January 28, 2013 gambling referendum in which the public voted against the regulation and taxation of web shops. The Prime Minister says he previously indicated that he was supporting Minister with responsibility for gaming Obi Wilchcombe after he announced plans to present a proposal to Cabinet aimed at regularizing web shops. Christie says before agreeing, he needed a moral authority to support the move.
That came from the fact that the Governor of the Central Bank brought to my attention that the country faced a very damning situation where there was a new banking order evolving and where millions and millions of dollars was being used in this new banking order, where in fact bank managers or loan managers were being hired, Mr. Speaker, to conduct personal mortgages. And I said, Mr. Speaker, where my personal commitment conflicts with the national interest, my words, the national interest takes precedence.
Member of Parliament for Montague Richard Lightbourne prompted the response during Tuesday's budget debate when he said he thought an effort would be made to explain why government went against the public's vote. He further brought up comments by former PLP Cabinet Minister Loftus Roker, who told a local daily that Christie should resign over what Roker called a $1 million+ mistake.
We've had a referendum. For what purpose? The people stated clearly and unequivocally what their position was, and that this government seems to ignore it. So by this sort of action, we're losing respect, Mr. Speaker, for the whole democratic process. We really are.
The Prime Minister says his renewed stance is based on the information he received and remained unapologetic.
I provided the rationalization for a decision where I moved from the results of the referendum, persuasive though it may be, okay, to a situation where I just referred to the Governor of the Central Bank, but it led me to have consultations with banks in the country. And I then made a decision. I stand by that decision.
During the recent budget communication, Christie confirmed plans to regulate web shops by July 1st. Cleopatra Murphy, ZNS Network News.
Well, answers about alleged spying by the United States National Security Agency on Bahamians should be forthcoming in about a week or so.
Foreign Affairs Minister, the Honorable Fred Mitchell, advised Parliament today that United States Secretary of State John Kerry is in receipt of government's request for an explanation about the recently surfaced claims about the NSA spying on every cell phone conversation in the Bahamas and has promised an answer within 1 week.
Well, Mr. Mitchell has already raised the issue with a number of regional bodies, including CARICOM and the Organization of American States.
The foreign minister also confirmed that his ministry has been able to confirm that no one in authority at any of the relevant local agencies authorized any such monitoring.
At the moment, the issue is being discussed bilaterally. There have been many views espoused, but almost universally there is the view that we must know the truth of these allegations, and if that is in fact the case, then the activity should cease. That in light of the continuing conversations with the U.S. side, we are allowing diplomacy to take its course for the moment. In the meantime, our own agencies are doing a thorough review of the allegations with ongoing reports to the government, and I promise to keep the country informed.
Well, from Parliament, we move on now to business news as the business community tonight is responding to the consideration for an increase in the country's minimum wage. Chairman of the Bahamas Chamber of Commerce and Employers Confederation, Robert Myers, told Janaea Noel Ferguson that an increase could be bad news for Bahamians and unemployment if the economy is not stable.
An increase in minimum wage not welcomed by those in the business community. Employers Confederation Chairman Robert Myers laments this could mean bad news for Bahamians.
So any price increases through wage growth or labor burden growth or taxes or services, etc., are going to put pressure on the economy, which could force greater unemployment. So it's great to say, we want to have wage growth, but if that comes at a cost of unemployment, then you're not really benefiting.
With unemployment at 16.2% and the introduction of a value-added tax at 7.5%, Myers agreed it will become more difficult for persons making the current minimum wage of $150 in the private sector and $210 in the public arena to keep up with the rising cost of living.
That's why we put so much pressure on the government to say, to keep the VAT as low as humanly possible. And to increase compliance, right? So we need to have more people paying taxes. You have to get more of those people that are in the informal economy out of the informal economy and paying taxes.
But for President of the Trade Union Congress, Obie Ferguson, the minimum wage rate is just one of the problems with wages that workers have to deal with.
Workers have been moved from permanent positions to the position of an independent contractor, or for that matter, a contract worker. By making that switch, they're no longer able to get vacation pay. They're no longer able to get holiday pay. They're no longer able to get redundancy pay. They're no longer able to get sick pay. So they're not classified as a worker. They have a job, yes, but they are not a worker. So when they're fired, nothing happens.
Ferguson and Labor Minister Shane Gibson feels the current rate is inadequate for Bahamians to improve their quality of life. Recent statistics revealed an increase in those living in poverty by 3.5%. Myers predicts potential job losses because of a wage increase. He also said taxes would further increase those numbers.
What this represents is Bahamians are going to have to roll up their sleeves and sweat. We're going to have to work harder. We're going to have to work smarter. You are not going to climb out of this kind of debt to GDP ratio and deficit by just passing a few laws.
Myers says in order for a minimum wage to work at this time, the country must be on good economic standings. Janaea Noel Ferguson, ZNS Network News.
As parliamentarians continued debate in the House of Assembly Wednesday morning, the Save the Bays Coalition, along with over 20 civic and environmental organizations, occupied Rawson Square, demonstrating for the implementation of what they are calling a new and real Freedom of Information Act. They say without it, true democracy cannot be realized. We get that story tonight from Charisma Robinson.
Civic and environmental groups demonstrating outside of Parliament Wednesday say Bahamians have the right to know the facts when it comes to the business of this country. Vice President of the Grand Bahama Human Rights Organization, Joseph Darville, says the controversy surrounding dredging around the Alistown dock in Bimini sparked this push.
We want to make sure that with the Freedom of Information Act in place, something that happened in Bimini, which is absolutely catastrophic to the environment, and we're not against development, but we are totally against development that comes and destroys the environment that has supported people in their livelihood for centuries in this country.
They're hoping Wednesday's demonstration would move the government closer to enacting a new and real Freedom of Information Act. Without it, they say, real democracy cannot be realized.
So we are calling upon the government and all political organizations to ensure that the passage and enactment of this act is one of their principal priorities. Because without that, even the press cannot properly serve the public because they do not have access to information.
In March 2012, the previous administration brought to Parliament a Freedom of Information bill. However, since then, it has not been implemented.
Answered your question. It was debated, and only thing need to be done now is for the Prime Minister to enact it and sign.
The bill that's before Parliament now has no teeth. Has no teeth. It's not worth the paper it's written on at this stage. So we would ask this government to do the right thing, to review the present bill that's before Parliament and ensure that it has teeth.
Deputy Prime Minister Philip Rabe Davis says that is something the government is working on.
We have looked at it and we have found that it's not workable in the present state, right? And once you have that has been decided and been done, and I think the Minister of Education, under whose portfolio the Freedom of Information Act falls, is working on a new model. And when our legislative agenda permits, it will be brought.
Now organizers are hoping to rally up more support for their cause through a 6-point petition. So far, they've gotten over 5,000 signatures. Charisma Robinson, ZNS Network News.
Member of Parliament for Michael, Minister of Agriculture and Marine Resources, the Honorable V. Alfred Gray, maintains his ministry is on target in achieving its objectives as outlined in the government's Charter for Governance.
Well, primary among them, he pronounced, is reducing the country's import bill, which currently stands at $1 billion annually.
Minister Gray noted the course of action already in progress towards this objective.
Well, Carla Palmer tonight tells us about his contribution to the 2014-2015 budget debate in the House of Assembly.
With a budget allocation of some $47,500,000 this 2014-2015 fiscal period, here is how Agriculture and Marine Resources Minister, the Honorable V. Alfred Gray, says the funds will be shared amongst his ministry, which includes 8 departments.
$6 million of that amount has been allocated to BAIC, and $5 million of that amount to BAMSI, the agricultural school, whilst the other $36 million was allocated to the various departments of my ministry.
The Bahamas Agricultural Marine Science Institute, BAMSI, however, is top in priority. According to Minister Gray, the cost to the government of spending $1 million on importing food into the country annually is totally unacceptable, and he's prepared to lead the charge in reducing this bill. He pinpoints BAMSI as the answer to this agricultural dilemma.
Mr. Speaker, as I speak to you now, there are 25 acres of banana under production. 25 acres. And it's intended to become 50 acres within the next 2 or 3 months. Bananas. And Mr. Speaker, it is expected that we will be able to produce 1 million pounds of banana annually for sale. We don't need to import any bananas after that. Mr. Speaker, as I speak to you now, there are 15 acres of pawpaw. My mother used to call it pawpaw, but they call it papaya. That's a big word. If I say papaya, the people who know me will know I talking differently, because I used to say pawpaw. But papaya, right now, 15 acres under cultivation in Andros. And Mr. Speaker, it is expected that 800,000 pounds of papaya will be produced annually. Why bring in any then? We won't need to do that. Mr. Speaker, as I speak to you now, land is being prepared to plant 25 acres of pineapple in Andros at BAMSI. And it's expected that 2 million pounds of pineapple will be produced every year.
And the list goes on. There is expected to be millions of pounds of cantaloupes, honeydew, and watermelons, as well as ginger and hot peppers, to name just a few produce to be locally grown at the tutorial and commercial training farm in North Andros.
The fruits of our labor will soon be for the eating.
Minister Gray says BAMSI is already staffed with as much as 40% Bahamians and identified His Excellency Dr. Godfrey Anius as its director. The facility is expected to officially open to the public in September this year. I'm Carla Palmer for ZNS Network News.
The Member of Parliament for Fort Charlotte, Dr. Andre Rollins, contends as the country attempts to implement tax reform, he does not believe value-added tax alone is the answer to addressing the country's fiscal deficit. Like his colleague Greg Moss, Dr. Rollins believes the answer is a combination of income, consumer, and corporate taxes. He says it would help to broaden the tax base, meet international compliance standards, and fight poverty by addressing growth in income inequality.
While I do not share the view held by my colleague from Marco City,
that the implementation of VAT will be disastrous for our country. I do, however, agree with his argument that VAT should be one of several combined tax initiatives used in concert to address our fiscal deficit. A combination of consumer, income, and corporate taxes, which enable us to maintain our reputation as a low-tax jurisdiction for the foreign businesses and high-net-worth individuals we wish to attract to our country.
Meanwhile, the Minister of Financial Services, the Honorable Ryan Pinder, also praised the government's forward-thinking efforts with the budget. The government, he says, has successfully managed to significantly reduce the country's deficit, and the country is on the right path.
Mr. Speaker, this budget we debate this week is premised on responsible spending, better revenue collections, and the balance between sourcing necessary government revenues against economic sustainability. This is a budget, Mr. Speaker, that continues to right the fiscal wrongs and the irresponsibility of the prior F&M administration. This is a budget process that over the last couple years is put in place to ensure that the Bahamas does not fall into the financial abyss of some of our brothers and sisters to the south, but finds itself on a stable and a sustainable financial course for years to come.
Another police officer is shot. The shocking details coming up.
And the expected changes at BTC. You're watching The Bahamas Tonight.
This segment of the news is brought to you by Shell Quality Fuels.